to the Wayne Public Library's virtual author chat. My guest today is Romanian adoptee Yael Adler. Yael is the author of From Gypsy to Jersey, which details the story of her adoption by sharing her uplifting personal story. Yael hopes to inspire and help other adoptees who want to learn more about their past and uncover their roots. Welcome, Yael. Can you please tell us a little more about yourself and your story?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and everybody who's tuning in tonight and participating in the conversation. Today really marks a special day for a number of reasons. One, it is the 1-year anniversary that my book, From Gypsy to Jersey, has been published. So I want to thank everybody who's supported me in my journey with that. Today also marks the first day of National Adoption Awareness Month. So I'd love to just take a minute to speak to that briefly before we even begin and I share my journey with you. So a little bit on how it started. In the 80s, it became National Adoption Week. And actually in the 90s, under Bill Clinton, it expanded and became a whole month dedicated to adoption awareness. It was created really to raise awareness about the urgent need for adoptive families, for children in the foster care system. But I think while that is so important, many adoptees like myself wish this month was also used to bring awareness in other areas of adoption. There's so many different areas where support is needed. There's the pre-adoption education and training. There's post-adoption support that is so needed for everyone in the adoption triad. That includes adoptees, that includes adoptive parents, and that includes birth families. Because adoption is so complex. I saw the other day on Instagram, someone phrased it so well, and that person said, you know, adoption can be good, it can be harmful, it can be beautiful, and it can also be painful. Not all adoption stories are happy, as that existing narrative seems to be more promoted than the other end of that. Not all of adoption is pain and trauma either. And, you know, that's why tonight I'm going to share with you my story, which unlike many adoptees does actually have a happy ending. So I wanted to share that with you. For those who are tuning in and they have access to video, can you see my screen okay? Yes, okay. I start out with this photo on the screen because this is really where it all started. Here, I am 2 years old and I grew up in a small village outside of Arad, Romania. I grew up in a small village outside of Arad, Romania. I lived in a 1-bedroom home with no running water, no bed to sleep in, no toilet. And it was really difficult times in Romania. In 1989, the year that I was born, really marked a significant year for Romania's history. It was actually the year of the Romanian Revolution, which put an end to communism in Romania. And when I look at that picture, I still, even though I've looked at it so many times, I still have so much trouble recognizing that little girl and that she's me. Because when I look at that picture, I just think to myself, wow, that little girl had such a different life. And her early years were so different from what I have now. And I still just stare at it. And sometimes I can't believe that it's me. Understanding what it was like in communist Romania and understanding post-communism is so vital to understanding my adoption story. In the 1970s, this man, Nicolae Ceausescu, was the dictator of Romania. And he implemented such harsh policies that made it so difficult to live. Aside from Romania being incredibly poor and Romania having a foreign debt, this man exported all of Romania's goods. So people had nothing to live on, times were incredibly desperate. And what he did was put enormous pressure on women to conceive and have children in an effort to grow Romania's communist population. Because the more people they were, the more Romania appeared powerful. And that was what he wanted. So what he did was he banned contraceptives, he made abortion illegal, And women were so desperate, they were going to all sorts of extremes. They were attempting to self-abort. They were selling children for survival money, as someone once told me. They were dropping their children off at the local orphanage, perhaps thinking maybe they would have a better chance living there. And they were putting children up for adoption. Either way, none of those situations were easy, and people had to make really difficult decisions. It was around the time in the early 90s that Barbara Walters and Hugh Downs, part of ABC 2020, they put out a series of broadcasts shedding light on what was happening in Romania and the thousands and thousands of children who had no families, who had nobody to care for them. And it showed all of the impoverished conditions and the inhumane conditions that these children were living in. And there's a famous segment, I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with it, but it was called Shame of a Nation. And that was one of the segments that are very well known that really shed light on the children in Romania during that time. Another segment that aired was a segment on private adoptions. And that was the one my parents were watching that night. And they knew that that was the avenue that they wanted to explore further. A little piece from my book, I wrote on the slide, my mother remembers it was March 1991 when they tuned into 2020. They didn't know it, but what they were about to watch would lead them to me, and that void in their life would soon be filled. At the end of the broadcast, Barbara Walters and Hugh Downs told viewers, please, if you're interested in getting some more information, contact the studio and we'll put you in touch with an attorney. So my parents did just that, and they were able to find an attorney who lived in Philadelphia, not too far from them. I had the privilege of tracking down that attorney and actually meeting him 28 years later with my mother. We went out to breakfast. He drove all the way from Philadelphia to New Jersey, to close to where we live, and we actually had the chance to sit down and meet face to face, which was incredible. He then told me that if and when the time comes that I want to explore finding my birth family, there was a man who lives in Romania today who does that on the side. He enjoys connecting people with their birth families and doing that type of work. So I thought about it long and hard, and I said to myself, okay, I'm going to take these steps and I'm going to do a birth family search. So I have a conversation with him. It took him about only a month to get all the information that he wanted and needed. And he said, okay, I'm ready to take the trip. It's going to be this weekend. So I thought, okay, he's going to go, he's going to get my questions answered. He'll prepare a report for me, and that'll be it. That weekend came and he decided to let me know that he was about to knock on her door. I get a text saying that she wants to FaceTime with me. So I was not prepared for that at all. It was an incredible shock. And it was then for the first time that I saw my birth mother, the woman who gave birth to me 28 years later. And I'm going to get back to that in just a second, because I jumped ahead of myself a little bit. But my parents made the trip out to Romania to meet me after speaking with the attorney. And these are some images from our very first meeting. Now, I labeled here the word heartbreaking, because when I look at these photos, they're heartbreaking on so many different fronts. One, you see the intensity, the love that my mother has for me, and you can tell how long she's been waiting for this moment to come. I, on the other hand, I'm not ready to accept all of this love that she has to give me, because I myself had just experienced a very traumatic event. That traumatic event was being separated from my birth family and being away from the only home that I ever knew. And I was going through this trauma, not understanding what was going on at such an early age. And here my parents were just trying to connect and love me and tell me that it was okay, trying to show me some level of comfort. And in these photos, it was the very first day that they were in Romania before legalizing my adoption. Once they finalized everything, they decided they wanted to meet my birth mother and meet my birth family. So they had contacted the attorney and they had set up this meeting. I really stopped to think about sometimes what that meeting could have been like. Actually staring the person in the eye who is putting their child up for adoption. And what a painful and heart-wrenching day that must have been. What a heavy meeting that must have been. And in my book, I talk about it a little bit after talking to my mother about what that day was like for her. You can see my birth mother's face on the left-hand side and how she's just struggling so much with this decision that was made. And of course, my parents are elated. They're finally growing their family and they're so happy. But I think that photo is so telling. So I wanted to share that. And then on the right-hand side, you see my parents by the courthouse where they were able to finalize my adoption. Now, fast forward 28 years later, I was cleaning out my mother's apartment, helping her to put it up for sale. And I come across this binder. I'm looking through it and I'm quickly realizing that these are all photos and paperwork relating to my adoption that I'd never seen before. For the first time ever, I'm seeing what my birth name was, which was Adriana. I'm seeing photos. I'm starting to see a court document that tells the story that I've never seen before. It mentions another girl. I start to wonder, do I have a sibling somewhere out there? All of a sudden, these things keep coming up. And it was in that moment that I decided I really wanted to piece together the missing blanks to my story. So that's what I did. And going back to what I was touching on before, that's when I decided to reach out to Danny. And that was when that FaceTime conversation happened. And in this photo, you'll see I am FaceTiming with my birth mother. And that experience was, the only way I can describe it was that I was completely numb. I was just in complete shock. It was not something that I was prepared for mentally, emotionally. Thankfully, I had my husband nudging me on the side and asking me, whispering some questions in my ear to ask, because I felt so frozen. I was looking at this woman who was so unfamiliar. I felt like I was just talking to a stranger, and it was so difficult to connect to because we didn't speak the same language and our conversation was being orchestrated by a translator. So that made it difficult. And I really just wanted to look at her. I just wanted to stare at her, see what her demeanor was like, look at her facial features, and just study her. And I kept waiting to feel something, happiness, sadness, anything. And when I was done with the call, I was thinking, what is wrong with me? I just felt like nothing. I was just staring and talking to the stranger. And it was such an unsatisfying experience to me. And towards the end of the call, she said to me, would you ever consider visiting me in Romania? And much to my surprise, I didn't hesitate in responding, yes, I would visit you. I would definitely be open to visiting you. And at the end of the conversation, I thought to myself, was I just being polite? Did I mean that? Was that sincere? Am I really going to visit her? And I decided that I really did want to. I wanted to get the full experience. I wanted to be able to look her in the eye in person. I wanted to be able to see where I came from. And I wanted to take those steps. So I booked my flight. I decided that I was going to make the trip. And I went by myself. And Daniel, who was the person who actually conducted the birth family search, was with me the entire trip. Acting as my tour guide and translator. So that worked out kind of nice. And I arrived at Romania and we got all settled in the hotel. And the very next day was going to be the reunion. So my nerves were shot. I was feeling tense and nervous. And we are at the restaurant in the hotel just waiting for them to come and arrive. And Only a few minutes before they come in, they are standing outside, my entire birth family. The women are carrying these huge, beautiful bouquets of flowers, these stunning roses with gold brushed petals. Everyone got dressed up for the occasion, which was so thoughtful. And they were about to walk into the hotel and meet me for the first time. In this photo, I met Daniela, my birth mother, for the first time. She walked in right away. She was the first one, and she held my face, and with tears coming down her face, she kept saying my birth name, Adriana, Adriana. And it was a really beautiful moment that we had, and I'll never forget it. It was as if she was unleashing 28 years of pain, of uncertainty, not knowing how I was doing, what my life was like. Was I happy? Was I healthy? It was just all let go in that moment. And I felt it. It was so strong. And it was just a beautiful moment. And I'm so glad that it was captured like this. We continued to take pictures in the restaurant. That is a photo with Daniela, you can see. I have a note on here, so many adoptees want to know if they look like their birth family. And I just threw that in there because I think that's such an interesting thing, us wanting to see that level of resemblance, almost as like some type of confirmation. And I think about that with my own kids, it's like that feeling you get when you see your child and you see them look like you, whether it's as a baby or if it's you can just tell when you're next to them and you can just so clearly see the resemblance. There's like this feeling of comfort that you get. And I felt that level of comfort when I stood and saw them in person and stood next to them in photos, and I could just see that resemblance, from our almond-shaped eyes to our dark hair to our face and everything. So I love that. And I introduce here Monica, who I discovered was my birth sister, my half sister. She had a different biological father. And she was only 3 years older than me. Monica actually was not put up for adoption. She still lives in Romania today, not too far from my birth mother. I wrote here, when I look at my sister, I see the life that I would have had, and I want so much for her. I feel that survivor's guilt all the time. And when we learned about each other, it was like we naturally just fell into that role of sisters. And yes, I learned about this concept of survivor's guilt in adoption. And someone described it to me like when people go off to war and they come home and they get to experience, life as normal, and they think back to those people who, they're not as fortunate and they don't get to live this life that you have right now. And that there's this whole idea of survivor's guilt in adoption where, I live a much more fortunate, privileged life than my birth sister and my birth family. And there's just a level of guilt that I feel and I carry every single day. And that's really difficult. And when I talk to Monica, I feel that, and it's both a joy and a pain when I talk to her, because I see her world, and I recognize that would have been my life. And that's just a difficult thing to carry when I talk to her and when I think about her and my birth family. But it is really nice that we've been able to carry out a relationship. We talk almost every day. And I think, growing up as an only child, you always kind of want to have that sibling, especially with girls. I think you always think about having that older sister, and you kind of fantasize about having like a relationship like that. And, in her world, being an only child is such a rarity. So the level of loneliness that she must have felt, I think about, because while sure, being an only child can be lonely at times, I don't think it's as rare here. And you don't necessarily feel that same degree of loneliness. But with her, culturally speaking, everyone around her had so many children, and she has so many cousins, and she has such a large family. I think like growing up, what that must have been like for her. And then to find out that she does have a sister, and that we're living such different lives, and we're so far apart, but we're able to carry out a simple relationship, I think is just such a beautiful thing. So I'm really grateful for that. And I'm really grateful that I was able to gain a sister out of that. So this photo is grandmother Flore. She was such a cute and sweet elderly lady. I was so glad I got to meet her. It was very important to Daniela that I come back to her house that first day that we meet, because she had a sister who remembered me, and she just wanted to meet me so bad because she was leaving the next day. So I got to go to Daniela's house that evening. And when I walked in and sat beside what would have been my grandmother, they told her who I was, and she grabbed my hand in the sweetest way to hold, as if she really remembered who I was. And it was just such a sweet feeling. And we had this moment that really reminded me that adoption affects so many people. It's not just me, and it's not just the birth family, but so many of the relatives, they remember when I was little, and they remember what it was like when I was put up for adoption. And I was told that they mourned me after the adoption took place, and they carried out my name. I found out that so many relatives carried out the name Adriana to kind of keep my memory alive and keep my name in the family. And what was so wild was to learn that my sister actually named one of her children Adriana, and she didn't even know about me. So all this time, she named her child after her sister, who she didn't even know about, which I was just so taken back by that. But I thought it was so beautiful and meaningful that they wanted to carry out the name Adriana. So that night, Daniela presented a really special gift to me, which was a traditional Roma outfit, or a Gypsy outfit. It consisted of a pretty red floral dress, a similar red scarf for my shoulders, and a matching headscarf. I could tell that it brought her so much joy when she dressed me in this outfit. And that is a whole other piece to my story, was discovering my roots, which was Gypsy or Roma. And there's so much to say about that. I learned that I was born into a society where women were and still are not respected. They are completely inferior to men. They're often abused. They are not, a lot of women don't have access to education. My birth mother can't read or write. Arranged marriages are still practiced as early as age 12 or 13. And it's just such a different lifestyle, a life that really doesn't have much opportunity, independence for women. And that's part of my feelings, why I have such a hard time when I talk to Monica, my sister, because I see what her life is every day, and I see how lonely and sad she is. And I feel like I have all of these things every day, and I'm so grateful for everything that I have. And she is stuck in this world that does not give her any of that. But this outfit was a really special gift that my birth mother gave to me, and I have it hung in my closet, and I love to just kind of have this piece of that that I'll always cherish. A big part of my trip was also just visiting the sites that were relevant to my adoption. That really just filled such a void for me that I didn't even know existed. Being able to see all of the sites, from the hospital to standing in front of that courthouse, that same courthouse where my parents stood and finalized my adoption. It just a feeling came over me that I felt so connected, being able to see where my life started, being able to see where I was born. And I wrote here, as I stood in front of the courthouse and had my photo taken, I imagined what that day must have been like for my parents. I pictured them walking in thinking the day we have been waiting for has finally come, knowing they were only steps from having a family. And I had that experience with every site that I visited. In front of the hospital, as I looked at it, I pictured Daniela going into labor with me and knowing that she was there by herself. My birth father was not there with her. He did not want to be involved at all. And she was all alone and thinking what was going through her mind. Did the stress of having to raise two children with no money outweigh the happiness that she felt on that day? What was that day like for her, taking me home for the next 2 years before putting me up for adoption? There were so many different feelings and thoughts that came through my head as I visited all of these places. Even seeing an orphanage, which wasn't a part of my story, but easily could have been for that time, was really moving to me. My final day in Romania was very difficult. Daniela, my birth mother, had to say goodbye all over again, which was very uneasy for me to see her getting so worked up as those moments approached me leaving. And I think as an adoptee, I really felt like I dropped this whole bomb on her. I completely flipped her life and world upside down. And even though I don't regret it, I know she doesn't regret it, but I had such mixed feelings that I just disrupted her life so much. And thinking about that day, thinking about Daniel knocking on her door on that random day and her answering it, and just seeing a stranger inquire about the child that you put up for adoption 28 years ago, and just opening up all of those feelings again of pain and hurt and trauma must have been so difficult. And having me there with her was probably the same feeling that I had with Monica. It was a pain and a joy all at once. And saying goodbye was not easy, but I'm so glad that I made that trip and that I was able to meet everyone and really just get a sense of what my life would have been. But it was very heart-wrenching to say goodbye. And they decided to take a step further and actually see me off. They all drove very far to go to the airport and say their final goodbyes. And there was just so much to think about, so much to process. And I was just really happy that I took that chance, a chance to meet everyone and to learn more about my adoption and fill in those missing blanks. Okay, so I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you so much. And I figured maybe now would be a good time to open up for questions.
As I had mentioned before, if anyone wants to type in the chat to ask their question, please do so, and I will read it to Yael, or she can read it herself because she is co-host. Also, I did have a question. So Monica is your only sister, no other siblings. Did your birth mom ever explain to you why she chose to put you up for adoption and not your sister?
That given she was a half sister and she had a different biological father and another whole side of the family, they were a lot more involved in helping care for her. And my birth father was very abusive. He would constantly abuse alcohol, and then he would abuse my birth mother to the point that she would have physical injuries from it. And it just was not an environment that she wanted me to be in. Whereas Monica really was not in that environment because other extended family was caring for her and helping with her. So that was the explanation I got from my birth mother.
Okay. Did anyone have a question, or Linda?
Okay.
Hi, Linda.
I love the title of your book,
Thank you.
From Gypsy to Jersey. And I'm not going to switch this story because I can learn so much from your story. My daughter's a Gypsy adoptee. And so she's 30. And like you said, Yael, it could be challenging, it could be beautiful, it could be, and it was, I'll be honest, a lot of stuff, a lot of mixed stuff. And so I was wondering if you could just share something that you may have not remembered so much, but found out about the Gypsy culture, or because I think, I need to hear it from you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest things were just the cultural differences were just so eye-opening to me. You know, the arranged marriages as early as age 12 and 13, you know, the lack of education, the lack of emphasis on the importance of education for a woman, the dependency on men, the lack of respect for women. You know, these were all things that were just part of the norm. I'll never forget on my trip there, I was asked several times if my husband beat me, as if that was just a standard normal question. And at first I was so taken back. I was like, no, of course my husband doesn't beat me. What do you mean? But they were so serious and genuinely concerned about this, because that is a part of their life. And it is very common that Gypsy men abuse alcohol, they abuse the women, and there's just such a lack of respect for women in that society and culture. And I think that's really important to acknowledge.
So even more so, yeah, it's more than your typical Romanian woman,
Oh yes, Romanians and Gypsies are two very different things.
Okay.
None of those things that I just mentioned are common for Romanians at all. That is very, very strict to the Gypsy culture.
Gotcha, okay. My daughter is your neighbor, Bulgaria. So,
yeah.
And a little bit different because all she knew was an orphanage. So she can't go back. Well, I'll learn a lot more too. Maybe you can, but it's a different thing, I think, because you don't know who you're looking for. And they signed off at birth. So a birth mother and an unknown father. So that was something they gave up at birth. And, but yet they had to stay in an orphanage for 3 years.
Yeah, most adoptees who I speak to and connect with have all been through an orphanage. It was very rare that I lived with my birth mother for 2 years. And I think, you know, that was really just a testament that she really did try to make it work. And she really did try her hardest. But it was just beyond what she could handle. It was beyond physically, financially. There was just nothing more she could give me and do for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think it's a loving thing? I mean, I always thought that a birth mother doing that showed a lot of love. Do you agree?
Yeah. I think I think every scenario and situation is different. I think in my personal experience, I do believe that it was out of love, and it was about, you know, wanting me to have more in life and wanting me to have the opportunities that she just could not give me, and that would never have been a part of my life living there. I wouldn't say that's the majority. I wouldn't say that's representative of all adoptees and their stories. I think my story is a little different. And I think the timing of my adoption is also plays such a big role into it. You know, right after communist Romania ended, the fall of communism, and all of that history playing into my adoption and so many other Romanian adoptees at that time in the early 90s. I think that's also a big piece of it. Because the times were just so desperate. People were living in complete poverty. They couldn't feed themselves, let alone their families. They had nothing. So I think that did play into it as well.
Yeah, let me ask the question that Carol put in the chat. How are conditions today in Romania? Do they allow contraception? Are women more educated? That's the question.
Yes. Times are definitely different in Romania. They've definitely come a long way. You know, in the Roma or Gypsy culture, things are still very much the same. And, that was also kind of hard to see for me, seeing my birth family and still how much they struggle today, because I guess I expected there to be so much more improvement in her life, when really there's really not. She still begs for money. The women are not educated. My sister had very little to no education. My birth mother can't read or write. And it's not as highly valued for a woman to get education in that type of culture. The goal is for a woman to have an arranged marriage, to stay home with the kids, to tend to her husband, and that's very much her purpose. Women really don't do a whole lot without their husband's permission or without the husband. Even in a room, the husband speaks. Something that was really surprising to me was when I visited a mall, actually in Romania, and there was a gypsy woman there. She was wearing a very flamboyant gypsy green and gold outfit. And as she went with her family, they walked in a straight line in the mall. The husband was at the front, the kids were behind him, and the woman was in the back. And Danny pointed out to me, that is how they walk in public. That is a very common sight. And I thought that was so interesting. And what does that say, right? Like when I go out with my husband, we walk alongside each other. We're a family, we walk together. But just that alone, spoke volumes to me.
Well, is there any equality for the people that you're talking about? It just seems like they don't have equal rights, with the rest of the population.
They don't. Unfortunately, there's a lot of discrimination against the gypsies that, still is very, very much in existence today. And as a matter of fact, my mother knew from the very beginning that I was born gypsy, and she never disclosed that to me. And I thought that was kind of interesting in itself. And I said, Mom, why did you not share that piece of information with me? That's a pretty big piece of my story. And she responded by saying, I didn't want you to feel any stigma around gypsy. And, I think that's just something, to keep in mind for adoptive parents. I think disclosing the whole story and all the pieces to the story is so important, and letting your child kind of process all of that on their own is also equally important. But it's nice to know the whole picture. And I think processing that is important.
Mm-hmm. What kind of government do they have there now? You mentioned the dictator at the time. Is there any kind of freedom for the people at all, or how is?
Yeah, it's very different now. I mean, Romanian culture, again, is also very different from gypsy culture. So it's completely different. Romania overall has modernized a great deal, and it's no longer anything like it was back in communist Romania times. So it's very different. They live a very normal life, similar to here.
I see. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
What year did you go over to Romania to see your family?
It was 2 years ago, actually, right before everything, the whole world turned upside down with COVID. So the timing was, impeccable, and everything kind of fell right into place for me, which, I think just goes to show that it was really meant to be, that I was really meant to take this trip. And I'm so glad that all the pieces kind of fell into place when they did.
Did you always know you wanted to write the book of your journey, or was that an afterthought after you went through the experience and met your birth family, or were you always planning on writing a book?
I always wanted to write a book, but I didn't have all of the pieces to my story. So, the bits and pieces that my parents shared with me, I always thought were kind of intriguing. And I kind of tabled it and just shelved it and said, one day I'm going to explore this further, because growing up, adoption wasn't really something that was at the forefront of my mind all the time. I think about it a lot more now after having gone through these experiences. But growing up, I really didn't think about my adoption so much, even though I grew up knowing that I was adopted. Nothing, that aspect was never a secret. But I knew that one day I was going to explore it further whenever that time, would come. And when I was cleaning up my mother's apartment, I literally just kind of fell into it. And I knew that that was the time to explore it further. And that's what I did.
Well, I think it took a lot of courage on your part, Yael, to pursue it. And everyone's story is different, as you said. My daughter, it was at the forefront of her mind through her life. And that may have been because she had siblings. And she always didn't feel she fit in exactly or looked like any of us. But I would love to hear in your words, and I think it's you're beautiful. My daughter is, and I love the look of the culture. What makes the culture? What makes that person that? I really don't know that.
What makes the person
Of the Gypsy culture?
Of the Gypsy culture? I think it's just something you're born into. I don't think it's something you're kind of initiated into. I think you're just born in that community and in that society.
Because you're from somewhere else, Yael? You're not from that country? Or?
I'm not really sure. Yeah, I don't have a clear answer for that. But I do know that they're pretty much scattered all over Eastern Europe. There's Gypsy communities all over Eastern Europe, and that's really where they're commonly congregated, if that helps at all.
Yes.
But you did bring up an interesting point with, your daughter having siblings and me being an only child. So I didn't necessarily feel that per se, but, I was having a conversation with some other adoptees earlier, and we were talking about, is it important for you to see those physical resemblances with your birth family? And everyone had such an interesting response. And I was sharing that, growing up, people would tell me that I looked like my parents all the time, like people who didn't know us. And I would just say like, oh, okay, yeah, thank you. But my mom has blonde hair and blue eyes. And, my dad, had more features like me. He was dark hair, round face, and, you could kind of pull it off, but there is that piece, right? There is that piece of not feeling like if you look so different from your parents and feeling that. And then when you do see those clear, glaring physical resemblances, it's an interesting experience, I think, for the adoptee.
It could be a whole different ballgame, and people would actually tell her, you don't look like your parents. See, so she would get that kind of thing. And I think that affected her at different times of her life, and not now, but growing up. I think you want to belong and feel like you're a part of something.
You do, absolutely. And I think, a lot of that is, how the parents kind of bring it all together, and I think now more than ever, adoptive parents are, taking part in more education and more awareness and just listening to adoptees in general. Whereas, when I grew up, my mother had no clue that there was this whole adoption community out there. She had no idea of the supports that were available for adoptees, for birth parents, for adoptive parents. She had no support at all. It wasn't something people talked about. It was kept very to yourself, and it was very personal, and it was very touchy and sensitive. And I think it's so different now. Now it's just become more open and more publicly talked about, and I think that's so much healthier to go about it that way.
Yeah, definitely, I agree.
Another question in the chat: can a woman leave the Gypsy community?
Can people leave the Gypsy community? That's a tough one. I'm not 100% sure. There was a relative of mine who I actually connected with, and she did. She moved to Ireland, and you know, she kind of started a new life for herself there. But you know, she's not removing herself from the Gypsy family. You know, she still has family and all of that, but she did have to remove herself for safety reasons. She was involved with somebody who was very physically abusive as well, and it just wasn't a safe setting for her son. And you know, she had to leave and basically start a new life somewhere else.
Does your birth family, do they all live in like a specific area of Romania, as you think you mentioned, or were they scattered all over? Are they still, does your sister have daughters, and is she raising them a little more modern since they're in Romania and they kind of live within a more modern world?
So she does. She has 2 daughters and 2 sons, one of which was named Adriana, actually, ironically, after me. And no, the Gypsy culture is very traditional, and they still practice the same things that have always been practiced. You know, they are not, you know, they're not ones to modernize and kind of go outside their culture. They're a very tight-knit community, and you know, they observe their practices the way that they always have.
Will you be returning? Do you see yourself going back, like after the pandemic is kind of over? Do you see yourself returning to visit? Did you take your children, or are you going to eventually take them to meet that side of the family?
I didn't take my children initially. They're very little, so that probably would have been a disaster. But I would love to go back. I would, because I think that first meeting, it was very short. It was very overwhelming. There were a lot of mixed emotions. I was meeting everyone for the first time, and my goal was really to just kind of take it all in. There really wasn't a whole lot of expectations that I had set forth for that initial meeting. I think the next trip, if and when that happens, it would be more about spending quality time with them, and you know, spending quality time with my birth sister and my birth mother. And that would be really nice, because I would really just get a chance to get to know them better. And that's really what I want. I want to get to know them better. And, you know, just the fact that they've been so open and so welcoming, and, you know, they've expressed such a willingness to be a part of my life and for me to be a part of their life and just connect in some way, shape, or form has been really, really special. And so many adoptees don't have that. They don't have this positive, uplifting story to share with people. It's very difficult to find your birth family depending on your circumstances. And, you know, many times the birth family does not want to have an open relationship or go back and revisit those painful memories that were associated with the adoption in the first place. So I was very fortunate to have both life-changing events, the birth search and the reunion, work out in my favor. And, you know, I did have a really positive experience, but again, that's very rare. I'm really more of the exception.
Yeah, I just thought that was a beautiful picture when they were all coming towards you with flowers. And that said everything. They said, it just said, you could put the caption of the word love on that. And so you're really blessed. You had wonderful parents that raised you and wonderful family that wants to know you.
Yes, exactly. And yes, they showed me so much love on my trip. They showered me with presents, and they went so above and beyond for me. They had a cake made with my family, and it said "Welcome home, Adriana" on the cake. It was unbelievable. And that's how it felt like. It felt like they were celebrating my return home in a sense.
That's what it looked like. And how did your folks take all of this, Yael, your parents?
It was very hard for them. It was very hard for my mother. My father unfortunately passed a couple of years ago, so I haven't really, you know, so he couldn't be involved in this whole process. But from my mother's point of view, adoption, like I said, was always a very sensitive subject for her. It was very difficult to talk about, to the point where her eyes would just swell up with water every time anything adoption was brought up. My parents tried to conceive for 10 years unsuccessfully. They experienced a prior failed adoption. And, that's all they really wanted. They just really wanted to have a child and to have a family. And, those feelings, I think, just kind of surfaced every time adoption was brought up. So it made it very hard for her. And, it was not easy having that conversation with her that I wanted to explore, learning more about my birth family, let alone travel there to meet everyone. And I think that's a very difficult conversation that adoptees have to, approaching that conversation is very difficult. So it's really helpful, when parents can just be supportive and, support the journey and, talk to them about it and say, I'm here for you. If this is something you want to explore, let's do it together. Or if you need help finding information, let's do that together. And just being in it with them is so important.
Thank you for sharing that. I can understand your mom,
Of course.
It didn't change your feelings about her.
No, not at all. And I think, what happens is adoptive parents, they feel this sense of rejection and abandonment when this topic of exploring, the birth family and going into reunion comes up. And I think that's the biggest mistake that people make, because you are our parents. You will always be our parents. And it has nothing to do with that. It's really nothing about you at all. But sometimes I think adoptive parents make it about them. But it has nothing to do with them. It's this universal feeling of just wanting to know where you come from and wanting to learn about that and explore that. So, no adoptive parent should ever take that to heart, that their child wants to explore that part of their life.
Yeah, Carol's asking, is there universal education in Romania?
Yes, absolutely. It's very much like here. Like I said, Romanians and Gypsies are two completely separate groups of people. They're very culturally different. Romanians are, it's very similar to here today in terms of getting an education, getting a job, having a family, everyday life is very similar.
So the government there doesn't require every child to be educated is really my question.
I can't really speak to that too much. I don't want to give any false information, but I know that Gypsies have been more, prone to getting an education, and that's been encouraged more across the board. Whether or not they get the proper and appropriate education is a different story, but access to education is available for everyone.
Oh, it is. Okay.
It is.
Thank you.
In the book, I read the section where you're talking about age, and your birth mom is like, I'm so old, and then you reveal how old she was, and you're like, no, in the United States, that's still young. That was a great scene, but and kind of a little sad that she felt that way. You tell a little more, so everyone else knows about it.
Yeah, I thought that was very, she thought that was hilarious that I found her, when we had that conversation and she's saying, oh my God, I'm such an old lady. I was like, old lady, you're in your 50s. Like, that's like the new nothing. What are you talking about? And she thought that was hilarious. She was cracking up like, and I was like, what? You're not old at all. So yeah, that was a pretty lighthearted, funny conversation that we had. But even looking at her, she looked older than she was, because she's just had such a hard life. She's had such a difficult life, and you can really see that on her face, all of her hardship and all that she's been through. And she really doesn't smile much. That was something I said on the trip. I kept saying, smile, smile. I want to see you smile. Like, I don't want to see you sad. give me a smile. And when she put on that gypsy traditional outfit, I can't tell you, her smile was so big. She was so happy. And I think it just made her life having me wear that, and her seeing me in that. She said, "You look like a doll." She said that to me in Romanian. And it was so beautiful. And I'm trying to see really quickly if I have a video. I have a video actually of her dressing me in it. I'd love to share that with you really fast if I can find it.
I also wanted to say I love the title also from Gypsy to Jersey. That was a really great title.
Oh, thank you. It really just came to me because it was so fitting of my experience that I said that has to be the title.
And the cover art is just perfect also. I mean, so good job on that too.
Very
I really wanted to kind of communicate, these two very different worlds kind of coming together, and there's a little lightheartedness to it also, but it really just shows both worlds and how different they are.
I wondered how Yael communicates with Monica.
Yeah, that's a great question. We utilize Google Translate. So it's just a tool that we use to translate one another, and we do like Facebook Messenger. So I just have to copy and paste every time that I talk to her. There are definitely easier tools, but for some reason I've just gotten into the habit of communicating with her that way, which is nice. And sometimes it's clunky and doesn't translate so smoothly, but for the most part, it's nice. And even if it's just small talk, it's almost every day, and I'll wake up to a picture of her just saying like, "Good morning, sister, let's have coffee." And it'll be like a picture of a coffee cup.
Nice, yeah.
Sweet. And I'm just like, that's such a nice way to start my day. So I found the video. I will share my screen and you can kind of see this whole experience that we have.
Oh, okay.
Daniela, spune-ne un pic acum ce facem noi aici. Ne bucurăm de venirea lui Adriana.
Adriana, da.
Și ce pregătești acolo? Ce ai aici?
Uite, aici am să gănesc o rochiță așa faină.
Da. Și o îmbraci acum în rochia țigănească? Foarte frumos.
S-a de pe Maria.
Tell her maybe I shouldn't have eaten so much.
Zice, speră că poate nu ar fi trebuit să mănânce prea mult ca să fie rochița.
Adriana,
We'll make it fit.
Potrivește cumva.
Numai că
Și bine, și decât dar nu
are să îi facă mai scurtă dacă vrea.
Lasă
Da,
că
mai
e.
scurtă, să fie mai scurtă dacă
You can make it a bit shorter if necessary.
How did it look?
Look, look. Put the shot.
Da.
Trebuie și ăla, șalul. Învățat-o cum să și-l pun acolo.
Și că nu poți zice că odată baticul
Tot
Da,
batic
nu, că nu așa stă
pot.
frumos, dacă nu.
Do I look pretty?
Și arat frumos?
Da.
Da. Yes.
Și n-am mai șulat căcutul.
N-am mai șulat.
Și în cap.
N-am șulat la căcutul.
Sigur, ca să fie.
Okay.
Îmi place.
It makes you
Să
happy.
aibă experiența complet.
Palal, palal. Palal. Uite așa. Hai să cărăm. Hai să uităm. Păpușa. Păpușici. N-am mai șulat.
You look like a dog. You look like a dog, she said. Păpușa. It's dog.
Așa să faci așa la piernă.
This is how the dress, the costume of the Roma.
Take a picture of me in this.
Now this was a video.
Poți să spui acum.
Yes. So I like
Oh,
to share that video.
that was wonderful.
Oh, that's
Thank you for sharing
beautiful.
that.
That is so beautiful.
It was a nice
You look so pretty in that. And
moment.
I
She-
bet that was such an answer to her prayers.
Your
Yes.
birth mom looks so happy to do that. Oh my gosh. We have a question from Amy. Are there resources available today for Romanian adoptees still struggling with abandonment issues resulting from their first year in an institution?
There are so many wonderful resources out there. I would be so happy to share that with you. Perhaps after I can give you like a list of wonderful resources for really everyone. There's great resources for adoptees, adoptive parents, birth families. There's so many great resources out there now that you can take advantage of.
If you want to send it to me, I have everyone's email address. I can send it on to them.
I would be happy to share that with all of you.
I wonder, and does anyone else have any other questions for Yael? Of course, this is our author chat, so I am going to ask, what advice would you give someone who wanted to write their adoption story or wanted to write any story, nonfiction, a memoir of some sort? So do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think just get it on paper. I think the best thing to do is just get everything down on paper, and it's a constant fine-tune process. But just getting your thoughts down on paper is the best way to go. And organizing all of that can come later. But it's so funny. Some of the best thoughts you have are like at night when you can't sleep, and it's just like I had so many of those nights where I couldn't sleep, and I just had to grab my phone or a piece of paper and just jot down my thought, because they just come at all different times. But and especially for adoptees, I mean, once they go through that birth search and reunion process, I feel like once you open that Pandora's box, especially, you're just constantly flooded with thoughts and feelings and flashbacks and thinking about these moments that occurred, or thinking about things at all different times, and you're continuously processing different things. So I think just, making sure you capture all of that in some way is important.
Did you share like the manuscript of your book? Did you share it with other adoptees, with your mom, with anyone in your family, who just wrote it and no one?
I did not share it with anyone. It was so personal, and I really I just wanted to have my eyes on it first. And once I put it out to the world, I knew everyone was going to see it, but it was very personal to me, and I didn't show it to anyone, not even my husband or mom or anyone.
Wow, that is unique. No one ever has said that they never shared it with anyone. Congratulations. I mean, it's really well written.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to it. I cheated. I read the first few pages.
It is nice and short. So
Yeah.
I designed it purposely to be a quick read, but it has a lot of layers and a lot of different adventure and thoughts in there. And I hope you enjoy it.
Oh, I know we will. And this will go to my daughter who lives in Minnesota, and she's looking forward to receiving it. Because the one day that she heard the word gypsy, she goes, I love that word. That's what I am.
Really, that's so great that was her reaction to.
She always took that as a good thing. So,
well, if you share her information, I'll send her a signed copy.
oh, would you? Oh, that's so kind of you. Thank you.
I can facilitate that. You can send it to me.
You're going to be her hero.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we want to thank Yael for joining us this evening and sharing her wonderful story of her journey. Not only her journey from Gypsy to Jersey, but her return to meet everyone in her birth family. It was a wonderful story, and thank you so much for joining us, Yael. Best of luck. Maybe the sequel will be your next. It will be your next journey with bringing your family with you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
All right.